I don't want to see the government shut down. I do think there's deeply flawed in areas that are of grave concern to me, like like Women, Infants, and Children program, the WIC program, which in Wisconsin we've seen a really big uptake in the use of that, and we're going to be about $1 billion short. And of course, we aren't meeting any of our emergency funding needs for all of the war and conflict that's going on. But I don't want the government to shut down. And it's very likely that I'm going to vote for this continuing resolution.
So, Congresswoman, you just mentioned some of the emergency funding needs, be it Israel or Ukraine. Are Democrats losing leverage here if they vote for this CR to get those things passed ultimately?
Well, this CR doesn't have that funding in it. And
exactly.
And of course, we passed the resolution earlier, which I, of course, didn't vote for, which was a $14 billion package for Israel only, but only with a gun to our heads to take away the funding for the IRS, to take billions away from the IRS, thus crippling our ability to catch tax cheats. And so that funding isn't going anywhere. So we're hopeful that that separately the Senate will send us a package with not only funding for these wars, Ukraine and Israel, but humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza, desperately needed.
There are about 60,000 people, we're told. I don't know if there's a count from the National Park Service in front of the Capitol, on the west front of the Capitol. I got caught in the traffic coming in this morning, Congresswoman, because so many streets are closed. It's a pro-Israel rally. I can only imagine that there are some counter-protesters out there as well. But your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and the Speaker of the House are among the many dignitaries who are speaking to this impassioned crowd today. Do you think that moves the ball at all on the request for funding?
Well, there is a willingness, I think, among Democrats and Republicans to support Israel. And of course, people do respect the First Amendment. I think it's extremely important that we invite people and welcome people to the Capitol to voice their concerns of all kinds. And so unlike January 6th, I expect that this is a rally which will be basically positive, which will affirm Israel's right to exist, and even the counter protesters, if there are any, I think are going to be respectful of this right. I don't know if that'll help or hurt, because like I said, I think the votes are here to provide funding to Israel, but I do think that many of us want to see it coupled with efforts to provide humanitarian assistance to Gaza, as well as providing funding for the Ukraine war.
Well, and clearly, Congresswoman, just the very fact that there are tens of thousands of individuals there representing on the Mall today speaks to the intensity of the moment and the passion that is still very much front and center when it comes to this conflict in particular. I just wonder, though, if that's still going to remain, if the same impetus will be there as time goes on. What do you think realistically is the timeline we're looking at for passage of funding for Israel?
Well, what I'll tell you is that there's a lot of concern about tamping this war down on many sides. Even folk who support Israel and support its right to defend itself are very concerned about making sure that our ally Israel really grounds itself and its struggle and is mindful of the humanitarian concerns and the Geneva Conventions that revolve around how to conduct a war. You know, I am not kidding. It is very, very complicated on the war activity. I sympathize with Israelis' mission to stop Hamas, but they have to be ever mindful of the cost, because you can win the war and lose the peace. And we do want to eventually, what's going to happen the day after this war? And God willing, the fighting will stop soon.
How about the story in Ukraine, Congresswoman? That seems to be a much heavier lift right now on Capitol Hill, largely because of Republican opposition to continued funding, or at least funding without quote unquote accountability, which hasn't really been defined by a lot of the members who are talking about it. It's starting to look like once this CR passes, that might be the last train to leave the station. Will all of this have to wait until next year?
Well, again, there hasn't been there hasn't been a funding initiative for Israel, and so I think we have another kick at the cat with this, with the not only the Democrats in the Senate, but with Mitch McConnell as well, and Republicans, to send us something over. We're going to be here, until at least the middle of December 15th, I would think. So another vehicle can move for this supplemental funding. What we have heard from our speaker is that they wanted to stop the government from shutting down and didn't want to obscure that mission with the funding for the wars. So I'm taking him at his word that the lane would still be open for that funding. And it's never too late to get money.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying, Congresswoman, is really this is something that will have to originate in the Senate, given the House has passed more than $14 billion of Israel funding, but it rescinded money from the IRS, therefore making it dead on arrival in the Senate. When we think about all of these things, whether supplemental or just simple appropriation bills in terms of funding that are going to have to be reconciled between the Senate and the House, assuming that this continuing resolution passes, gets signed, the government doesn't shut down this weekend, how likely is it in your mind that it either shuts down partially on January 19th or February 2nd as you try to reconcile these things?
Well, I'll tell you, it all depends on whether or not the Freedom Caucus goes after Mike Johnson and deposes him for working with Democrats. This continuing resolution is definitely not going to pass. Just its structure requires a supermajority. So clearly, Democrats would have to vote for this continuing resolution. And if that's the red line for some of the conservatives that brought McCarthy down, then that would be another wrinkle. For the life of me, it is hard to see why we would want to go through another. I mean, we're going to be anxious for 2 more months. It's going to be hard to stomach our Thanksgiving dinner and our Christmas dinner, knowing that we've got to go through this again. And once they pass all 12 appropriations bills, December, 18th, say, and funding is going to run out, and they want us to vote on some of the crazy cuts that they're probably going to be proposing in our appropriations bills. It'll be another showdown. So, I think stopping a government shutdown, by Friday is admirable, but we're just setting ourselves up for a shutdown in January if, in fact, they continue down the path of not observing the deal that then Speaker McCarthy made with the president, which, we gave up $1 trillion in that deal. That was not a frivolous deal. And were we to have stuck with that deal, I think we'd be in a much better place. We shouldn't be here today. So it's hard for me to project what's going to happen on January 19th. But I do know that today will be nothing more than a stopgap.
I'm guessing Kevin McCarthy would agree with you on that deal, Congresswoman. Have you heard from Hakeem Jeffries? Is the Democratic leadership behind this CR, or is he kind of telling you to vote your conscience? What's the word from upstairs?
Yeah, he's not whipping on this at all. So we're free to vote, how we will. It's not the deal that we created. It's not the deal that Hakeem Jeffries put together. They didn't put it together with our help and our support. So I think that he is leaving it up to us. And like I said, I've been with my legislative director all afternoon working through some of the things that I find very disappointing. And I mentioned, in particular, the WIC funding,
Yeah.
women, infants and children. To me, that's very, very critical. So I may vote for the CR today, but I'll be watching, and they'll need my vote or want my vote in the future. So they need to be mindful of the
Yeah.
things that are important